As I start recording this part of this presumably very long video, it is the eve of 2026, which is to say that it's the 31st of December 2025 in the year of our Lord Talos. New Year's Eve, to use layman's terms for it. And once more I am left my lonesome with my intrusive and negative thoughts. And this year it is particularly more potent, poignant, invasive than it has been in previous years. I mean, it wasn't too long ago where I actually had to phone the Samaritans because I felt suicidal. It is not too long ago when I sort of confessed to my partner just how lonely and difficult life is at the moment, because I've sort of been acting as the carer to my family once more, as Mama-Law by night has been bedbound in a shitload of pain. And, of course, I have to care for my brother as well because he too is disabled and he needs help and support with a bunch of other things. I feel very cut off. I feel very lonely. I do not have friends to be going out celebrating the next revolution of the planet round the sun for yet another shitty year in the 2020s. I feel increasingly isolated and more nihilistic, which is all rather befitting of the subject matter of this very long video, an unpacking and a reviewing of all 14 volumes of Tokyo Ghoul, a controversial manga series because of its edge, because of its exportation, its stereotypical presentation of emo and punk and goth culture to some extent, and just having, well, far more edge than my opening monologue. The anime in which it spawned, particularly the first season, the opening theme for the first half of its anime was sort of an anthem for fucking punky edgelords within the anime fandom. And now you're probably going to be sitting there wondering just how much I was talking about was actually true, or how much of it was just exaggerated bullshit. Now, regarding Tokyo Ghoul, I picked up the anime, I want to say in 2017, maybe 2016, when I wasn't busting my nuts off with my degree, writing music for a small but very successful independent video game, otherwise known as 2 Point Hospital, and also binging fucking huge JRPGs like Nier Automata, Persona 5, Final Fantasy 15, also Chaos Child, and Tales of Berseria. I got a dissertation for my degree, by the way, so I think I was doing something right along there. Amongst all of that, I was watching a shitload of anime, and I picked up like a bundle of the first and second season. It's going to be up there for you to go and oogle at. I really enjoyed the first season. I really enjoyed the first episode of the second season. I did not enjoy the rest of it. But that first season it turns out to be very fresh in my mind still, despite the fact that it's been, well, 8 years, now going on 9 years when this video comes out. Just how much of an impact that it's had on me, the violence, the visceral, and how really I kind of connect with a lot of its more edgier subject matters, how despite the lead protagonist being everything I despise in a protagonist, it's actually a very engaging one to have, and some of the twists and turns that happen within that have been so fascinating. And fun fact, this is actually my second attempt at starting this video, because this was going to have an unboxing element because it came with a big old box with some loose tape, and might have been scented with lavender, which may or may not have given me an allergic reaction of some description. But just going through these gorgeous books, particularly their covers, which is going to be floating up there for you to go and oogle at now, because I think there's probably a better way of demonstrating it. I mean, I could hold up this one here, but it's not really going to demonstrate like how amazing the artwork is. I mean, yeah, it is pretty cool, and for the most part, this is a very striking, almost impressionistic sort of style. I tend to throw that word around a lot when I'm talking about artwork in books. I'm not a huge art aficionado, but I do like the impressionist movement of like the early 20th century, which, as the name would imply, they're sort of paintings of landscapes that create an impression of something. So it's very dreamlike, very wispy and almost fairy tale, but not quite in your face. As I said, it creates an impression of something, of a scene or something. Like, you know that these are people, but it's sort of a dreamlike quality, good, bad, or indifferent. So since watching the anime, I have desperately tried to get my hands on the manga. My local bookstore in my town would have some, but it would be like issue 1, 5, 7, you know, that sort of thing. And if I'm going to read something, I'd much rather just read something all in one go. So I wasn't just having to jump about, spend money, hope I can find it, etc. and so forth. You know this before. We've done comic book reviews before, where we had a look at The Walking Dead, where in these big 4 volumes at about several thousand pages each, we reviewed the whole lot of it. That's going to appear up there for you. It's actually the longest video on the channel, believe it or not. So I'd much rather just go through everything all at once and own it in that form, rather than like darting about and everything. But regarding Tokyo Ghoul, once more, it was very difficult to find for one reason or another, and I knew there's like a big old box set that you can get where it's basically these books in a box. But that was always really expensive to do, and I just didn't want to spend that much money, especially if it was something that I didn't think I was going to enjoy that much, which is a bit silly really, given how much I love the anime and how much of an impression it has led on my life, how I consume media, and just how I enjoy horror as a whole. Honestly, it's just adding to my love and appreciation for all things horror related. But regardless, I'm a cheapskate, so I'm going to try and save as much money as I can. So I was able to win this just before Christmas of 2025 in an eBay bid, a little sneakily, I have to say. Somebody had left a bid on there, and I just paid like £5 extra. Nobody else bid it. I paid it for like 60 quid if we're including all the shipping. So it was like 55 and then a 5 for shipping, which was a bit of a discount if I was to buy them all individually, properly, I guess. Well, not secondhand is what I mean, or the big old box set. And these arrived today, alongside another manga compilation, which is Ghost in the Shell, but I'm not going to be talking about that one here. That's going to have its own separate video, because right now, I want to get stuck in all 14 of these volumes and just give my thoughts and opinions about the whole series as I go along. I'm not going to rewatch the anime, because although I don't remember characters, I have a pretty good remembrance about the things that happen in that, which is really weird, honestly, given I'd only watched it once nearly 10 years ago. I don't know how I'm going to break the video up at this point, honestly. I don't think it's going to make much sense to do it bit by bit, because I'll probably end up reading like a volume a day or something if I'm in top spirits. I may actually just divide it in like the first 7 and then the second 7, or I may do it in groups of 2. I don't really know. It depends how quickly that I'm reading these, honestly. Or if I end up just reading them all in one day, I'll just... Well, you'll see it in the title of the video. And I'll just talk about my thoughts and opinions then. But what am I want to take away from this? I'm wanting to kind of hope that it's as good as the internet says that it is. Because whenever you hear people talk about the anime, there will always be at least one person that comes up and say, oh, you should read the manga, it's definitely better. It's nothing like the second season. And also there's a third season, like Tokyo Ghoul Re, which is based upon the manga of the same name, which is set a few years after the first lot. So what you have is like season 1 and 3 follow through the meta plot, the lore, whatever, the main story, and then the second season just doesn't do that. And weirder still, apparently the author, whose name is Sui Ishida, or however the pronunciation is, which is impressive because I read that upside down, wanted the second season to go like that, which I find a wee bit unusual, but if he was happy with it and that's what he wants to do and he had that creative control, I mean, kudos to him, but you made a fucking wrong call there, honestly. You know, just as a passionate fan or anything, not like I know any better, but yeah, I just really want to enjoy that, hopefully more so than I did the anime way back when. And also, it's been about 9 years, my tastes and appreciation for things have, like, changed and matured as well, I think, so hopefully there's some new nuances I can find in there that can just have a lot of fun with, honestly. I decided to go with the 2 blocks of 7 format purely because I've been knocking out a manga an hour, so I'm probably going to have the entire series done in 14 hours. 14 volumes in 14 hours. Yeah, that's making its way into the YouTube title somehow, because we do love a bit of clickbait here on YouTube. But you'll know, actually, if you've been following along with me on social media and all the YouTube community posts, that I've been doing like these little micro-review reaction things as I've been reading them. And if you haven't done that, you should really change that, because YouTube does not do a great job of telling my subscribers about the videos that I'm putting out like it's fucking supposed to. But the other thing is that I've really been enjoying it so far, and in terms of comparing it to the anime, we're at the end of the first season pretty much, and I'm just about to start the first episode of the second season with volume 8. And I've really been enjoying it so far, and I've been really surprised overall by how much I've been enjoying it. Not because I was expecting it to be bad or anything, because as much as I loved the first season, I kind of expected the manga to be good. I'm just surprised about some of the things that it does better than the anime, and it kind of makes me question some of the direction that the anime does in ways that I previously would have found acceptable but now find a little bit frustrating. So if you're expecting a spoiler-free review, I don't do those, so come back later or just fuck off entirely. I'm not really fussed either way, because I think it's a lot more interesting and engaging than we have a look at the product as a whole, the good, bad and different, and not shy away from any of its more problematic areas, which there aren't many. I think there are a couple, and it's purely a preference thing, but I'm also going to come in from the lens that I understand why said problematic things are in there. But to start us off, I think that we should talk about what ghouls are, because all we get in terms of a descriptor to begin with is in the first page. Ghouls have existed since time immemorial. There's a group of people that go and hunt them, called the CCG, or at least in Tokyo, Japan, which is where all of this is set. And ghouls eat flesh to survive. That's it. There isn't much of a lore dive, like there isn't much of a connection to any other sort of supernatural thing out there, at least to my knowledge. There may be some like more Japanese-centric things put in there, but I haven't really done any research about how this all came about. But let's be real here, the ghouls in Tokyo Ghoul are vampire stand-ins that don't have to worry about sunlight. They have red eyes. It's explained later on, much later on in the manga, like in volume 6, which is like up here, so almost halfway, we're told a bit more about how the ghouls defend themselves. I mean, we see it because they've got these different things, like these kagane things that poke out of their backs. Some of them come out of their arms, some of them come out of their shoulders, some of them comes out of the neck, the base, and sort of loops round in a weird four-way rock, paper, scissors format, about the strength over each one. So the neck, the shoulders, the back, the base, and then it goes back to the top again. Which I do not remember the names of. They've got different advantages and different weaknesses. Some are fast, some are bulky, some are not particularly good at anything, but it's like a good overall sort of thing. One of them are like insanely fast at healing themselves, which of course is the one that our protagonist enters in. And it's really tragic how he becomes a ghoul. Yes, he becomes one. It's not like vampires and like you get bitten or eaten by one and then you come back as a vampire. The ghouls and humans are separate entities. They generally don't mix. And our lead character, Kaneki, I believe the name is. I'm probably getting the pronunciation wrong, but honestly, I don't care. If you know who I'm talking about, you know who I'm fucking talking about. He's an ordinary boy, like college student, well, university student at this point. He's 18 years old at this point. There's a time jump and he becomes 19 just because it says a few months have passed. So it's not like huge, but it feels like a natural progression of things. He's at this cafe, which we then find out is a cafe that's filled with ghouls, nicer ghouls that are like eating humanely, i.e. they're not going around killing humans and being more animalistic with things. They're sourcing their meat from like suicide victims and like these weird coffee sugar bean things. Like apparently they can eat and drink coffee just fine. That's not really explained at this point, but that may well happen later on. So Kaneki is having like a meet up with his friend Hide, and Kaneki meets up with this girl called Rise, who they have this hobby of reading, and she tricks him and then tries to kill and eat him. She then crushed under this construction site. Kaneki passes out because he's had a lot of flesh loss, because he had a lot of flesh and blood lost. And then some doctor decides to, we need to rescue this boy, we're going to use these organs here and put him back in. And that's always been like a weird plot point for me. It's like, surely as a doctor you would know that this was a ghoul, like there's something different about their makeup or her eyes or something. So this operation happened, and it's beginning to allude as we go a bit further on that this was done deliberately. Maybe we'll find out later on like what actually happens, because the anime doesn't ever reveal this. It's all in the balance of the manga to try and tell me what's going on. But he's not a full ghoul. He is a half ghoul, and only one of his eyes turns red. And this is a part of the plot that I've never really liked. Like, I've never liked the concept of like half vampires or dampirs, or in the case of Vampire the Masquerade, like the main channel's focus, thin-blooded, like a diluted, weaker form of a vampire, monster, ghoul thing. Only in the fiction, half ghouls are much stronger than regular ghouls, which is a logic I don't quite understand in terms of like the biology makeup sort of thing, because the whole story is shown through Kanediki as he's trying to come to terms with him being a ghoul by rejecting it and focusing on the fact that he's a human, he's not a monster, and he sees things from both angles, like he's understanding the world of ghouls and some of the more violent ghouls that he comes across later on in the manga. But he's also, through his existence and his interactions, is showing off his more humane side of things and making people be a bit more tame. And those in the 20th ward, there are different ward sections within Tokyo. Some of them are occupied by different ghouls that are more monstrous. The 20th ward are like the more humane ones, the one I described to you in the cafe. So that is interesting, and that is explored a lot better in the manga than the anime. But I've always found like the half ghoul vampire thing and characters who become monsters who take far too long to come to terms with what they are, to the point of stubbornness, to the fact that it's making them weak and it's hurting others around them, really fucking frustrating. Yes, it's a totally understandable, humane, human reaction to things, especially from somebody who's like 18, 19 years old, who's clearly had a very sheltered life, although we find out that it's not as sheltered as it once appears to be. So it's going to take a while to get over the process, but as I said, this is moving through the process of a few months, and we don't really see him break down a little bit. Yeah, he starts defending his friends a bit more, but he doesn't have enough meat in him, he doesn't have enough power in him. It's described that the more flesh that you have in you, the more powerful that you are. You're able to use your Kagane, but we actually see later on that despite some of the earlier fiction description, eating a ghoul makes the ghoul more powerful, and there's a little exchange battle that happens later on where there's a sheer act of desperation. Tuga, I believe her name is, who I've always loved her design just because I'm a fucking edgy emo goth person. I just love her whole aesthetic and her nudiness, and the weird juxtaposition that she has in her character I feel is a bit more interesting than Kanege's, because she wants to be human, because she wants to live a life and actually feel that and actually fit in, but she knows that she's a ghoul, and there's this real sense of jealousy and envy for Kaneki, who actually has the best of both worlds. And he doesn't have to decide per se, but he does have to decide because he's a ghoul, and no one's going to treat him as a human, especially with the fact that we see through these different agents that are hunting these ghouls, that one-eyed ghouls is a thing, and we actually see some other ghouls, and one-eyed ghouls, are, as I said earlier on, are a lot more powerful and much more feared. So Kaneki is actually in a much worse position because he is seen as much more monstrous than he wants to be. And Tuga's character is a lot more interesting, I feel, because it's just portrayed a lot better. And I just prefer characters like that than the weird, coddled, innocent, oh, I don't want to do anything monstrous. But that being said, it's not as bad in the manga, partly because I came into it knowing that this was going to be a thing. But everything moves at such a breakneck pace that it really doesn't feel that it's being focused on too much. I mean, it comes up in the most inconvenient of times, and Kaneki is slowly, but perhaps too slowly for my own preferences and for the pace of the fiction, in the sense that a lot of people get killed because of his inability to accept the fact that he is a ghoul. He does begin to fight back, he does want to protect himself, he doesn't want people to get hurt, and there's some really great training montages between him and Tuga, a bit from somebody else as well. So he is wanting to try, but he's not going to use like the full extent of his power so he doesn't lose control. But of course, you would know if you've seen the anime, he does lose control, and I'm kind of aware that he really does lose the fucking plot through the manga, and he goes through different phases, which is visibly represented by his hair colour, which I will touch upon in just a moment. But in a sense, because everything moves so fast, and also with the fucking gorgeous art style that is simultaneously really clear and really messy, it feels a lot more impactful. You feel the pain that he's going through when he tries to eat meat, when he comes to the realisation that he's a ghoul because he's eating the normal food and it all tastes horrible. Every punch, every kick, every tear of flesh, every bit of emotional distraught is really felt in the chest because of how striking the art style is. And I'm really surprised that the anime went with this much more cleaner, more tame art style, probably because that's what was the in thing at the time. But yeah, it sells the action, the drama well, and certain scenes look really cool because it's all really flashy and fast and whatever. You feel the neck-breaking pace of things a lot more in such a short space of time. Sure, with an anime you could pace things out much better, although I think the anime doesn't really pace things out very well because of how long it expands things. With a manga of this length, you're not really able to do that very well. So what would usually last over the process of a few minutes ends up being a few panels of a manga. And there's a scene earlier on where you have this investigator and his mentor, who's this fucking nut who's obsessed with like the kaganes of these ghouls in the perspective of like these quinkes or whatever they're called, because these investigators use the ghouls' weapons against them to tear them out, and they turn them into like these like spears and claws and things, these whips, and like some of them have these wings to protect themselves with. It's all really frightening stuff, just how morbid and barbaric it is, and they're presented as being the good guys in a sense, you know, because the ghouls are clearly the invaders, but that also presents a very interesting narrative. Is it fair to be killing these people and prosecuting them because of who and what they are? They can't help being what they are. And you've noticed I just refer to the ghouls as people. That wasn't intentional. But that's the really interesting narrative here, that for a lot of this manga we're seeing these investigators being really barbaric and monstrous and being callous with their murdering. But you also see that with some of the ghouls as well, where we're ghouls, we're monsters, like what's the fucking point of being human, like trying to pretend to be something they're not, they're going to kill us anyway, and some of it are doing for the thrill of the hunt, and there's that very one famous one who's just in it to fucking torture people because he gets a bit of a rise out of it. But I love the juxtaposition of the narrative. It's one of the things I loved about the anime, that it's very clear that neither side is good, but neither side is bad either. There's this very bloody grey narrative, and I feel a bit more for the investigators a bit more, because later on in the manga you actually see a lot more of the investigators chatting to each other, because you see in the anime later on like all these new characters come in and they feel just like your standard shonen boss character who's got these improved abilities and whatnot, but you see conversations between them. You feel the plight that they're going to, like they believe they're doing the city a good service, and in a sense that they are. But they've all got different emotions, all different struggles, little nuances in their characters. It's not much, admittedly. I can't tell you any of their names or motives other than Amon, who's really henched out and he's like focused on this one ghoul who saved him, which is Kaneki, and Zuzo, who is this non-binary presenting character, male presenting, and there's a couple of people who are like blatantly transphobic towards them, and Zuzo is very pissed off by this, and they're covered in stitches, not because they've been torn up or they're hurt or anything, which is, I believe, the assumption that you're made to believe in the anime, because I don't think it ever explains it, or if it does, I've completely washed over it. It's like the part of like the tattoo art form sort of thing, like you can have like things stitched into you to make yourself look pretty or whatever your vibe you're going for. I say pretty because they show like a flower that they've got on their arm and then they tear out because they don't like it. They've got them under their eyelids, down their chest, around their fingers and their wrist sort of thing. So rather than just being presented as like a nutter in the anime and a bit kooky, which admittedly they are presented as rather kooky in the anime, there's a surprising amount of humanity with them as well, because it's just an expression of an art form rather than just being, oh, they're crazy, they've just done this to themselves sort of thing. Something else that also surprised me is the ghoul by the name of the Gourmet. A lot of these ghouls have nicknames and they all wear masks to hide their identities, and it's also an expression of the person of who they are. The Gourmet's character I had very mixed feelings of when I watched the anime, because I loved the way that he dressed, I loved the way that he spoke, but he was presented in a very perverted and homophobic way. And this is a common thing found with a lot of Japanese anime and manga, where queer characters are presented to be like these very over-the-top, overly camp, pretentious ways, and the way that they dress and they act, I feel is just a little bit crass. But honestly, it like borderlines fucking blackface gollywog sort of things, which is a controversial take, I know, given how harmful people see that sort of thing is. But I don't see enough people talking about how offensive when Japan do this with queer people. And I didn't like the character as well because there was very clear fetishistic content in there. Like, the ghoul that's within Kaneki, or at least part of him, is Rise. He then gives off the scent off her and he has her powers. And the Gourmet smells her on him and he loves the scent. And then he realises that he's like a one-eyed ghoul, so he's actually a lot better, more unique, all the same. And like, he like dabs like something off of him with a handkerchief, goes to the bathroom, he just sniffs this handkerchief and like gets really high off the smell sort of thing, because he's wanting to find like the next meal, and he kidnaps him in a sense and has them fighting off with some other people. Now in the anime, For some weird reason, I remember this being a fucking panty sniffer sort of thing, which made it all the more weird. And this sniffing thing is just like hammed up to the nth degree in the anime because it's supposed to be funny, a trope sort of thing. And to be fair, the sniffing of the scent off the handkerchief is kind of fetishistic of that panty sniffing thing. It's not as bad in the manga. It happens the once, which makes it more impactful. It's very clear that he's obsessed with this ghoul because he wants to eat him, because you know how unique and special that he is. But he's not as in your face. He's a bit more sinister because the writing in the manga has a bit more reservation to it, which I really appreciate it. It's unfortunately the only time we have a queer character who's presented being this over-the-top, flamboyant sort of thing, and the second instance of it I find a bit more offensive, but not as much from what I recall being in the anime at least. But just coming back to Zuzo to allow me to go forward, it's with his introduction, or their introduction, I guess, because the gender's not really specified other than the fact that clearly Zuzo is mask presenting, but Zuzo seems to be very annoyed by the whole thing in general, which is a very interesting bit of like non-binary / trans inclusion, and yet they completely fucked up with the more queer elements, or other queer elements I should say. But anyway, it's the introduction of Zuzo, and then what happens from volume 5 afterwards, that a lot of the plot begins to change. Because something that I haven't mentioned is that each of the volumes have got like a little short at the end. Some of them are a bit more jokey in presentation, but they all expand bits of the characters' backstories and like adds a bit more motion, which is actually where we see a lot more of that nuance of the different investigators. And in the middle of volume 5, there's actually a short on Rise, so we have a bit more information about where she comes from, how she took over, how she ended up in the 20th ward, because she just sort of appeared one day, and she sort of appeared in this other ward, Ward 11, and they have a different set of rules to Ward 20, and this ghoul by the name of Banjo, who then becomes the de facto leader, then takes in charge. He's in love with Rise. He, of course, finds out that she's dead, but doesn't hold anything against Kaneki over it. He actually becomes quite loyal to Kaneki about it, everything. The reason why I'm mentioning Banjo here is because I had no recollection of this character at all, because he's barely fucking mentioned in the anime. And I'm really surprised by that, because there's a lot of Kaneki's own personal development with his own humanity and ghouls, because Banjo is a little like him in the sense that he's a ghoul and he's a bit more humane. He doesn't think he's a good leader because he's not as strong as everyone else. He's got a lot of fortitude, but he's not as a good fighter as anybody else. So kind of in a sense, the inverse of Kaneki in some description. And each of the manga also starts with like a nice profile of the different ghouls, and characters are going to like be starring it, as it were. So later on, when we're introduced to the ghoul of Jason, there's a little profile about his likes and whatever. But there's also an introduction profile thing to the two honcho investigators at the time, Amon and his boss, who then gets killed by a couple of ghouls, one of them a child, who ends up being really fucking powerful because they have both elements of their parents, which is a very interesting development in the ghoul lore that's not really talked about as much at the moment. It's mentioned that his weapon, like the Quinque, is actually belonging to the mother that was killed in the previous issue, which is really sick, and how much he gets a bit of a fucking buzz out of that, and just hates how they're just emulating human emotions, like they don't have any feelings or anything, they're just killing machines, they are not allowed any sentience. It's revealed that the Quinque is with her, which I'd usually complain about being spoilerish, but one, I already knew that, but two, if you read that, you get an idea about what these weapons are, and it's a real, oh my fucking god. And also it's a bit of a test to see if you've been paying attention to people's names or whatever. Again, really interesting gut punch. It just worked a lot better here than it did in the anime, despite the fact that it's actually revealing it before the punchline of like what's actually going on. So I don't know how that managed to work so well, but it does. And I know I was talking about Banjo, but I just want to mention this point regarding the Quinques, Kagane sort of things. It's described really late in the fiction about what all of those are, you know, the 4-point rock, paper, scissors thing that's going on. And you have an investigator describing that to Zuzo, who's a much lower rank than everyone else, but clearly a lot more skilled than everyone else that's there. So something's not quite right there. And I also think it's a bit weird that Zuzo is being described all this because they would have known all of this, you know, being inducted or whatever. But it's sort of treated like a, you need to be careful with these things because this is a very dangerous mission, etc. and so forth. So a bit of a recap, as it were. And I think at some point the author then realised they needed to describe what was fucking going on, just know how ghouls worked. Which is a very interesting way of delivering the information, because you'd usually get that sort of thing very early on. It's a very interesting subversion of like the established narrative telling device, that you're told what you need to know when you need to know. Like, you can see that these ghouls have got different powers. Some are fast, some are more bulky. Kaneki is really fucking good at healing himself, and his like come out of his fucking back like these like tentacle sort of things. Like, you can see that they're different, and you learn things as, you know, Kaneki, you know, this is all alien to him. He's not going to be force-fed and everything. He isn't told how all of these work, or at least not that we see anyway, but it's then told from the inspector's perspective once we've seen enough to understand things fully, rather than being given all this information at once. So it's a really effective way of doing things here. And again, just a great masterclass of storytelling, honestly. But going back to Banjo, and who forms this like semi-good relationship with Kaneki, they all get captured by these 11th Ward ghouls, or these First Ward, I can't remember what number it is now because there's a bit of crossover here. The group of ghouls known as the Aorgi Tree, again I'm probably mispronouncing that, really violent bunch, because they're looking for Risei. The overly queer one can smell on Kaneki, as like I said. They're all kidnapped and then made to do the basic work of like chopping up the meat, feeding them, you know, all that real fucking base menial stuff. And then they all decide to escape as they work out like their different like schedules of going on patrols, like going into the city, doing this, that and the other. It backfires on them. They all get kidnapped again, and this ghoul by the name of Jason, or rather the nickname is Jason because he wears a hockey mask. He originally comes from the 13th Ward, and he loves torturing people. That westernized inclusion, I think, was a really interesting choice, especially for a much wider market, because it begins to set people up about what to expect. They're very bloody, they're very violent, they've got no heart, but yet we've seen quite a lot of ghouls like that. But yet, with that bit of association, just further cements how much of a monster this character is going to be. Now, Jason, which I'm going to be referring to him as Jason here rather than the Japanese name Yamori, because that's just easier for me to remember and to pronounce correctly, claims that if Kaneki comes with him, he will let everybody else go. That's a lie, because we see that this mother and kid get killed later on within the next volume. But Kaneki sacrifices himself because it's like the noble human thing to do. But Jason just really wants to torture him because he sees that he's a one-eyed ghoul, and he really wants to break him to make him accept to who and what he is. At least that's how it's presented. I think he just wants to torture him because he hasn't tortured something like this before, and he just wants to see how far he can fucking push him. And it's this torture scene that's really famous within manga and anime spaces, because of how edgy, I guess, the artwork is, possibly in the manga, but more so in the anime, or how it's presented. Like, what we see as the torture is that Jason is constantly cutting off his toes, which the anime doesn't show because it's kind of tame in that respect. It's clear that it's quite violent. It's traumatizing for Kaneki because you hear all the great voice acting with the screams and the pains and the begs for mercy. But you see it in the manga, you see the toes being removed, and because Kaneki's got these incredible healing capabilities, because the type of Kagane that he has via a Risei being in him in a sense, that they keep growing back at lightning speed, so they just keep coming off. As this is all happening, Jason insists that Kagane keeps counting back from 1,000 in intervals of 7, which is torture in of itself, because I can barely count back from 1,000, let alone in intervals of 7. But he does this just to keep him sane, to keep him something to focus on, to keep him some degree of groundedness. And this is alluded a little bit beforehand, because you see like these close-up of these centipedes. He drops a centipede in his ear hole just to have that run around and fuck with him, and it's like the equivalent of like a fucking fire ant, like in his ear and everything else that's going on. Beats him, tortures him, forces him to choose like who should die, this ghoul mother or this ghoul child. He doesn't choose any of them. The queer partner comes in because the queer one's in a relationship with Jason. And just to pause myself for a moment, the short at the end of Volume 6 does present a bit of their relationship together, and there's also a bit of that within the actual torture scene, which presents a weird level of humanity for Jason. And I didn't think I was going to be feeling for him at all, but that's just the great writing that's going on here. But because of all this lovey-dovey stuff, and I'm not doing that because of the quoting, but it's because Nico, the queer one whose name I've just remembered, pops in. Don't you think this is a bit unnecessary? Don't you think that you're doing something a bit too much here? He doesn't think so, so he kills one because he's just had enough, storms off, and then Nico kills the other one out of pity. all the while, Jason is just monologuing at Kaneki, like wanting to see what make him become a ghoul, or maybe he's just doing it for the fucking thrill of it. But he talks about why he is the ghoul that he was, because something very similar happened to him. He was taken in by his investigator, and he was tortured by a human investigator. He fucking snapped one day, ate a couple of ghouls, which confirms properly that eating ghouls does make ghouls more powerful, as we kind of see a little bit beforehand in a scene where Toga eats a bit of Kaneki to get some strength, which makes herself momentarily much stronger, so she goes to fight against the Gourmet, as the character's known. And it's very interesting, the humanity that's presented with Jason doing all of this, because it's a well-known fact that those who abuse will often abuse themselves as kids, or at whatever point in their life. Usually it's from kids to adulthood. And it's interesting that chain wasn't broken, it was just fed into a lot more. And it's just, again, ghouls not being human, just the weird conflict between humanity and ghoulality, for lack of a better phrase. Just how really at the end of the day there's not much difference between either of them. It's just their methods of doing things are just, well, they're not even that different from each other, honestly. It's just two sides of the same fucking coin. And the art that shows off all of this is just harrowing. And I know that I've talked a little bit about the artwork before, about how well sadness and frustration is captured, but there are moments where the characters feel surprised or shocked, and there is just a weird edge to it. And I don't mean like edgy, but I don't know how to describe it, but I really don't want to show it here, because it's something that I feel you should be experiencing for yourself, because it really does hit you different. That whole torture scene hits you different because of the visceralness of the art style and how the established structure changes. Text is all over the screen. It becomes a lot more messy. It's the format, the different panels changes. It's not so regulated. It's you feel Taneki's pain. You feel his torture. You feel him slowly fucking losing it. And even though I knew everything that was going on in there, like the breaking of the fingers, the little stim for lack of brace thing that Jason does, the thing with the fingers, which, fun fact, this has become a stim of mine now because of that, because it just feels really fucking smoothing to do, for better and for worse, i.e. from its association. The centipede, the counting, and the anime, this is all just dragged out. And I think now in the anime it drags on a bit too much. And again, the pace that you see it in the manga is just perfect, because you don't really know how long it's going on for, because the concept of time is just lost on Kaneki now, and it's because it's happening so fast, you think it's all happening all at once. No, it's being dragged out here. I don't know if I'm explaining this all very well, but the pacing in its presentation here is just so fucking sublime. And I know that the torture scene has garnered such of a reputation for just being overly edgy, overly dramatic. A lot of that's to do with like pictures and whatnot being misquoted and like becoming memes out of unnecessarily. And I say that perhaps with a bias, because I've always really liked the presentation of things. I've always seen myself as like a edgelord goth, so I would lean a bit more to those sort of more dramatic, borderline romantic things. But I always felt a bit iffy with the way that it shows Kaneki gaining his silver hair or white hair when he goes through so much trauma. It just changes. It sort of reminisces a future manga panel. He like throws his hair back and the black sort of blossoms into the white, and he's got these flowers around him because he's in his own head talking to Rise. It's not really Rise, it's still a figment of his imagination, which is really a part of himself, like pushing him over the edge, the ghoul part of him, quite literally. And the thing that actually pushes him over the edge, both in the anime and the manga, is the fact that he's thinking about how his mum betrayed him, or he felt that his mum betrayed him, because the mum placed focus on the aunt who then looked after him and then didn't treat him very nice. And there's a very small panel, and if I can find it online, I'll put it on someone's screen, otherwise you're just going to have to cope with a bad picture that I took. And it's like talking about how increasingly the aunt became a very unpleasant person to be around, because she was jealous of her sister and their son for being better, more intelligent than both her and her own son is, and the son never took school very seriously. And it's just the different meals, like a full meal, a little meal, and then money to go and buy food yourself, and the text that goes with that as well. That's just fucking harrowing. That's just grim. That's abuse. And you can only like slot into places like the other things that happen. Like, yeah, she was shouting at him and yeah, treated him like shit, but did she hit him? Like, did she do all these other really neglectful, abusive things? out of jealousy and spite. And it's this realization that makes him fully embrace who and what he is. A ghoul, a human that no one's really cared for him, that he's, despite his emotions on humanity has betrayed him every fucking turn of his life. On the investigators, his mother, his aunt, probably the cousin, because I imagine that would probably span some unpleasantries from like the two male siblings living to each other over time, but that's not talked upon at all. But the manga doesn't show the acceptance of him being a ghoul in this sort of almost romantic style, which I would usually applaud because, again, goth romantic individual that I am, I feel it's kind of disrespectful to fucking actual trauma survivors, that the way that it's presented, and you don't have like this rose petal thing around him. No, you just get that. Now, that's horrifying, because he starts eating himself to survive, like this recycling of ghoul flesh, as it were, because he's just sort of losing it, because he's not really getting anything to eat, another torture tactic. And it makes you wonder, does he fucking pull off his own fucking face, or is that just there for shock value? I mean, if it is, it fucking works. I can understand why the anime didn't do that. And I will admit that I had seen that image before. I didn't know the context of it. I thought that this was just one of those like out of context mean edits. I felt sick looking at that. He's gone. You really feel that he's gone. Kaneki, no matter his transformations, because I know there are bits where he becomes more mad, probably from eating other ghouls. I don't quite remember how it's presented. I think it's more explored in the second anime season, so I can't really take that as proof of like an actual progression. But he's clearly not in when he meets up with the other ghouls again, because he absolutely fucking floors Jason. Like, he gets stabbed once with like these like own Kaneki, but yeah, Kaneki now a ghoul, he completely fucking floors him. And this is the fact that Jason has eaten other ghouls. So Kaneki by himself as a half ghoul is much stronger than somebody who has eaten 2 to 3 ghouls. That is it. He ate 3 ghouls in this prison, eats these other 2 Kanekis within him, and he's now a half ghoul with like these ever parts on top of that. So yeah, Kaneki is a really fucking powerful ghoul. And now he's not going to be holding back any punches. Or at least he does a little bit when he meets up with the group again. A bit of humanity. But he assumes himself as the leader now in a real calm, like, no offense, I'm just going to be taking over. I don't want you to have that burden. But that panel that I showed a moment ago is... I was looking at that for like a minute, just like... Fuck, I'm so sorry, kid. Like, again, 19, maybe 20, because we don't know how much time has passed since then. He's gone. Like, completely, yeah, which is sad and fucking horrifying at the same time. And of course, all of his other buddies from 20th Ward come and attempt to rescue him, who haven't found him yet at the point of my reading. And they're going to be a real shock to find him. And their boss, who's like this old man ghoul who runs this cafe, like, expect him to be dead, he says to everyone else. But he says to someone else privately, he's probably not going to be the same person. And it's very much alluding that this old man ghoul is a very powerful, very wise, who has seen a lot of shit. And it's alluded, and I can't remember if the anime confirms this, I don't think it does, that he is this very powerful ghoul known as the Owl. And it's mentioned through these investigators that there was this big event many, many years ago, like the Owl, and they thought he was dead or he ran away or whatever. And it's implied that this old man is the Owl. And now he's coming to basically fuck everyone over. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the anime adapts that, whether the anime is going to confirm that this is in fact the Owl, or whether it's someone different, because the leader of the Ogi tree is this one-eyed ghoul who is called the One-Eyed Owl or something like that. I can't quite remember the name there. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next. I'm very excited to see what happens next because, as I mentioned already, everything has led up to the end of the first season and the beginning of the first one now. And I know that the second season doesn't really adhere to the plot of the manga at all, so I'm entering the unknown here, and I'm just very excited to see Kaneki's downfall. Not as grim as I just made it sound, but I want to see how he handles with things now, how his friends handle things now. And just exploration of just the psychological nature of being a ghoul, and just the psychology of him coping with being a ghoul, and whether he actually does go down this rabbit hole becoming more of a monster, and if so, how. and how he has to retrain himself to be human. Yeah, there's a lot of ifs and curiosities with this, and I'm just very, very excited to get stuck in with Volume 8 up to 14 of Tokyo Ghoul. So I've done it. I have read all of Tokyo Ghoul. Across 2 days, I read the remaining 8. I did 3 on one day, and then 5 yesterday, which would be the 19th of January 2026 in the year of our Lord Telos. And I really, really enjoyed it. And like the first part, I made some notes of things I wanted to talk about. That is until I got to the last 2 to 3 volumes, where I barely wasn't writing anything because I was just so blown away and moved by what I was reading that I just kind of forgot to detach myself from what I was reading enough to write my thoughts and opinions on things. I mean, there's a couple of things here and there, but there isn't a lot, because I found it all just so emotionally stirring, and there were a couple of tearjerkers in there. I'm not going to lie, I didn't quite cry. I came close, which some might think is a bit daft, like crying over a bit of fiction, but you've just got no soul if you can't be moved by art like that. And I knew what was going to happen, or had some idea of what was going to happen if the anime was any form of guidance, which turned out to be a little bit. But also, when you open up each of the volumes, as I mentioned, you've got those profiles of people. But in the last one, you've got a profile for a character known as the Eye Patch Ghoul / the Centipede, which is Kaneki. And it says at the bottom here, spoilers, eradicated by Special Investigator Arama at Underground V14 route during said operation. The operation being like this big battle at the end where a lot of the ghouls are protecting the cafe, each other, because basically every single investigator and their mother has gone to try and hunt down the owl, that big baddie that escaped 10 years ago, who we then find out isn't actually the owl proper. The owl is actually Yoshima's son, who is a offspring of a human and a ghoul, which is super fucking rare, and this ghoul just fucking hates humans and ghouls alike and just eats everything. Swallows his dad whole at one point as well, which is a pretty frightening stuff. Hi, Future Lore here. I'm just interrupting myself in this weird place because I have to get this off my mind now, otherwise it's going to feel weird if I do it later on. I have only just noticed that second portrait, the one that's above Kaneki. It's just when I opened it, I just saw that, and that's all that I just focused on, and then I just, no, he can't fucking die here. Like, why are you spoiling this now? Which, by the way, does actually make it far more impactful when you go and read and find that he has fucking died, because the wording of such implies that he escaped or got away or whatever it is, they took him on board, because I know a little bit about the setup for Tokyo Ghoul Re, which I'll talk about later in the video when I'm actually talking about what I think Tokyo Ghoul Re is going to be. That character above Kaneki is the author that he and somebody else and Rise really like. She appears at this towards the end because she's having a book signing and they go and have the certain books signed. But she then goes and speaks to the investigator Amon and drips him a little inside information about something that's happening that may be alluding to the fact that the investigators know that whole Kano thing, and they may or may not be making artificial one-eyed ghouls. And there's a bit towards the end when somebody who I now realise looks like her appears and says, "Hello, Dad. There is also a ghoul that is covered in bandages who seems to know a lot of what's going on as well. I do not know if any of these are connected, but I would not be surprised if that author, who in the colour portrait you saw a moment ago had one red eye, is this one-eyed king who is orchestrating a lot more than we're being led to believe, because I did think it was very weird that this author just so happened to know this, but she's investigating ghouls, so maybe as a journalist she might have picked up on something, but having just realised what I realise now, I feel I'm just about to crack something big. I don't mention this in the video because, as I just said, I've only just noticed this now, but if I don't mention this now, anyway, I've said all of that, so anyway, I'll go back to Depressed All by Night. So the investigators are battling who they believe is the owl, and then another one arrives who is a far more monstrous, and they're all shitting themselves because they don't know what to do. And seeing all these different investigators and the ghouls, some of them coming out of retirement as it were, because Yoshima has like quelled their angry, violent spirits, you know, to be more peaceful, to be more loving, to be more accepting of humans and other ghouls as well. And now they're going complete balls to the walls, defending themselves and fighting away these investigators who, similar to the anime, does have that issue of like, oh, shonen dropping these really important characters with a big final boss fight with like special enhanced versions of Quinkes. We see a bit earlier on in the manga that the special investigators were like above the rank 1, so the best of the best basically have like this Quinque armor that's defending them as they're fighting against like these triple S rank ghouls, which is the owl and the sun. Kenke becomes a rank 2 due to some events that I'll talk about in a moment. But basically, they're going toe to toe as like a version of ghouls, basically using the ghouls' weapons and defensive mechanisms against, you know, the ghouls, which sort of puts it on a weird toxic head. Like, okay, so ghouls are bad, but you're using all their tools against them, so you're becoming like a proto ghoul, you're becoming as dangerous as them. Very interesting conversation ethics there. You know, all these different ghouls fighting like these apes and the dogs. Keneki's lot doesn't, for the most part. They're just off hiding, keeping away because they're not strong enough to deal with all of this. And despite the fact that you've got all these different investigators dropping in, it feels a lot more impactful here just because the pacing of everything is so much better. We see a lot during the second half of this. The thoughts and reflections and the interactions of the different investigators. You see some of these more important ones come in and have conversations, brief as that is. I did have to go back and remind myself a bit, okay, have we seen such and such before? Because there's a bit where all of them are having like this big old meeting, and a couple of them do appear here. And because you also have more of that connection with the characters in the cafe, the ghouls, who then turn out being really powerful and strong themselves, you feel a lot more for the ghouls as well, but you honestly feel a lot more for the investigators. They don't just feel like this established franchise's villains from the perspective of our heroes, the ghouls, that they have lives, they have feelings, they have emotions. Towards the end of it, when they're going into this big battle in the 20th War to fight the Owl and all of his associates, they all have to write like these testament notes, where basically, as one person describes it, essentially a suicide notes that they're having to write to their loved ones because they may not survive this. You've got a couple who are terrified because they do not want to die. There is even a panel or 2 panels in one of the last ones I'll put up on the screen somewhere where this younger investigator is like rank 2, so just above rank 3, so in the middle of the road sort of thing, who wants to be better, who wants to do more investigative, one wants to prove himself, but he's now thrown into the deep end with everyone else having to fight the owl. And he's writing this note to his mother. He goes to visit his mother, not saying why he's there, and he just leaves this message, which is real fucking heartbreaking and real emotionally stirring stuff. It's, you feel for these investigators, even though they're fucking bastards, just not finding a better way of letting these ghouls survive, especially when the series is really suggesting that these ghouls have been around for ever. Like, this is just a thing of the world. They haven't just like popped out of the void sort of thing, that these individuals, these people, the civilization do exist. Because there's actually conversation about somebody going to Germany to study ghouls, or they had studied in Germany for ghouls, and another ghoul, a really powerful one, had travelled the world like mastering all the martial arts sort of thing. So it's a global thing, it's not just limited to Japan, but you feel a lot more for the investigators here, and it's just this real bleak and nihilistic output that no one's right, no one's wrong, and everyone's right and everyone's wrong. It's just fucking violence and bloodshed that hasn't really solved anything. Because at the end of it, the owl, the like bigger, more violent owl who eats his father, fucking weird sentence to say, escapes. Like, he's hunted down by like the best hunter, investigator rather, this young guy called Ariyama, who I think I mentioned earlier on is this really cool looking guy with glasses, like short, well kept hair. In the anime, he's wearing like this very tight looking white jacket. He looks really cool. He reminds me a little bit of Chorus from the Pokemon games. That sort of like peak badass scientific drip. He's got 2 Quinkes, which some of the investigators do, which is like a rare special circumstance. He doesn't have like this big bulky armor some of the other investigators do. But he does have like these really fine, elegant spears that can like shape. Well, it's actually one or two, I can't quite remember, that shape-shift and change, and one of them like fires like electric blasts at people, and it's really rare that these Quincays can actually like just fire energy like that. And you don't see this with any of the other ghouls other than like fine projectiles from their wings, which is the specific type of ghoul that can spout wings and are really fast and agile. But this energy blast thing is different, and Ariama completely wipes the floor almost with the owl. I mean, he gets away, but the owl is clearly on the defensive here. And as I mentioned, Ariama is the one that kills Kenkei at the end. He has that fight over Mon, who's dead now because the two fought and Kenkei sort of killed him. I say sort of because he was fighting him, not trying to kill him, because he didn't want to kill him, because he was really trying not to kill people and like lose himself to the more ghoul side of things. Doesn't work, obviously. And Kenkei does manage to cut Ariama, but again, Ariama just completely floors him. Ariama knows him by his name, which is interesting thing, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment when I'm talking about Tokyo Ghoul Re. It's just sad to watch, just how at the end of it, Kenkei realises just how selfish he's been. Like, he's been trying to protect people, but he's just been doing it from the selfish standpoint, like feeling he has to protect everyone, feeling that he has to do the right thing to be the fucking hero. And then you have on the other side of things Tuka, who was trying to get him to be more like a ghoul, but now is rejecting her ghoulness, I guess. Her ghoul nature, the ghoul part, well, her being a ghoul, and like trying really hard to be a human. She wants to be a human. They can't find the middle ground, so they like completely separate, and she doesn't know that he's dead. Well, probably with the time jump that happens, she'll pick up on that. But she wants to go and save everybody, and Yomo, the sort of quiet, silent sort, doesn't let her, because what's the point of it? Like, they're redeeming themselves because they're atoning for their sins. Both Yoshimura, who did kill a lot of people, because we find out about him when he's revealing that the owl is his son, or at least one of the owls of his son, because he took on the mantle of the owl himself to protect his son. He killed a lot of people, ate a lot of ghouls and people, which is why the way he looks what he does. Part of this other separate, like, shadowy organisation, implied to be the Aorigi, like the main antagonistic ghoul faction. Of like, if there's any antagonist faction, it's them and Kano, the doctor who made Kaneki a half ghoul. So all of these people are redeeming themselves, and Toko isn't. And she wants to go and help and atone for sins or whatever. She's told to grow up, like, you have an opportunity to live the life that you want to live. And Kaneki's part of that as well, because all the killing that he's done and all the horrible things that he's done throughout the latter part of the manga. But just to like completely shatter the tone for a moment, he's hot now. Like, damn, like halfway through like this 8 set, like he has a shower and he steps out, and like there's just like a quarter panel of him just like fucking ripped, and I thought, I would happily spread my Krakenade to have some of his Kakanate in. Like, damn, son, like the glow up there. And it was kind of funny just seeing how that happened, because he's training to fight this much more stronger ghoul. The one who I mentioned is like the martial artist expert who was released when Arugi invaded like this special base that was being used to house all these really dangerous ghouls. And I forgot, there's a bit that's mentioned at the beginning that he learns all these different fighting styles by martial arts and just absorbing all this information from books that he's reading, so he can like try and go toe to toe with him. But it doesn't work, unfortunately. Which I'm kind of glad that it doesn't, because it just shows that some limitations on Kaneki's powers. Yes, he eats a lot of these other ghouls, and when he finds out the true nature of what he is, and the reason why that he is been acting more human is the fact that the medicine that he was taking at the beginning were these emotional suppressors. And Kano didn't just do this haphazardly, that this was deliberate. Oh, and we found out that Rize lives. It wasn't just a kidney that was removed, like he was harvesting her, and he created some other ghouls with her as well, like these twin girls, one with black hair, one with white, opposite red eyes. I love that fucking trope of anime. Like, you've got these really badass twins that don't speak all that much. It's a very fucking anime JRPG thing, and I just love that vibe. It's so fucking cool. And again, these characters, as brief as they are, have a really tragic backstory as well. They had lived in this big house, parents were killed off by ghouls, and these two were taken in by the investigators to use their anger and their revenge to make them perfect hunters, which is such a horrible fucking grooming, I guess, tactic, to create the best of the best, to fight against the best sort of thing. But that sort of backfired because Kano sort of took them off with them to make them into ghouls. It's not really explained properly how he managed to get away with this, but that's what happens, I guess. And there's a sibling for them as well, a character that we know as Juzo, the wild killer with all the stitches and things in them. Only it turns out that Juzo isn't as much of a killer as we see. Juzo in their youth, because they're taken in by the investigators at one point as well, is blamed for killing animals, but actually we then find out it was an investigator, and we see with the hand gestures that it was the investigator that was torturing ghouls, and he's just killing animals, and it's just a matter of fact that Juzo's at the wrong place at the wrong time. The investigators know it was that particular investigator. It was, we'll just blame Juzo, it's just the easiest thing to do, which is fucking messed up. And Juzo actually wasn't raised in the investigators like everybody else. They were kidnapped by a ghoul and then raised as a ghoul as a pet animal, and was paid to put on shows and to do all these really horrible acts and kill a lot of people. And it's really horrifying bit that I think a lot of people can relate to if you're trans and non-binary, and this might be a bit triggering for you, so apologies in advance. This ghoul woman is dressing him up as a girl. Juzo is very clearly a guy in this, but dresses Juzo up as a girl when she's not torturing him to make pain meaningless, to numb it out of him, because Juzo at one point has his stomach cut open and doesn't realise it until he looks down and is like, oh shit. And Juzo also loses a leg at one point as well towards the end, fighting the owl. There's a lot of limbs and people that die in that bit as well, which is, again, just showing the real fucking power of things. But going back to Juzo and the forced acceptance of a gender that doesn't quite belong to them. Juzo doesn't feel quite comfortable in dresses because, is identifying as a boy. The ghoul that has Juzo as a girl is like, oh, you're not going to look like this forever. I know what to do. Takes a mallet and just completely squashes the dick out of existence. And officially, Juzo has no gender, which kind of puts a lot of dark context into the way that Genzo was treating people when questioning them being a boy, and the glares that they got, because that's very traumatic for them. And Juzo didn't really get the education and the upbringing they did, so their mentality and the way they just view on life is fucking distorted, because all they were used to was just killing people. It's okay to kill people because they've been raised to kill for entertainment, for sport, but then they'll move into an investigative environment where they're now being paid to kill, and yet they get told off for when they kill a police officer that treats them badly, or just going in haphazardly and just killing things and not working together as a team because that's what they've been trained to do. Again, Juzo is a real fucking tragic character here, and that was one of those tearjerker moments. Just realised just how fucked over Juzo was in life, which also puts some context in the Stitch art thing that's going on, because there's a panel, and I won't show it on YouTube because I don't think YouTube would have liked that very much, where they're sort of strung up from these fish hooks, counting. There's a lot of fucking counting and torture to keep them sane. I'm not quite too sure why ghouls do this. There's a very interesting link between ghouls in general in this series, and hate to think what the actual connecting factor is, whether it's something that happens in real life and an actual torture technique, etc. and so forth. But on a similar, we're also introduced to this ghoul who idolizes Yamori Jason, who one of the descriptors we get in these books is a brother, or views him as a brother, who kind of gets sidelined as this joke character because doesn't really read and speak all that well, slurs words, mispronounces things, half-nosed expressions. He calls one character selfish, but keeps calling them shellfish, because, that's a very common mistake to make, a shoulder-to-shoulder sort of thing. And they're treated as an idiot and a bit of a laughing stock, because when they were introduced, I thought, okay, we're going to have a serious antagonist, the younger brother sort of thing, how twisted they're going to be. It's no, they're just sort of a weird fantasizer, sort of looking up to this character, hoping to be tortured, happy to serve, etc. and so forth. And I just thought that was a bit disappointing, because there could have been a lot more that would be done with that, rather than treating them as a little disabled, at least. At least that was, I feel, the vibe that was going for them, which is a bit sad. Not in like the sad Medusa sense, but sad that there was just some untapped potential there. And the character that's calling them stupid is Toka's brother, who is beaten near half to death near the beginning, because similar to the first episode of the second season, the first group of 8 here is that escape scene, you know, and Kaneki just thrashing everybody left, right, and centre. He won't kill Toka's brother because that would upset Toko, so what Kaneki does is beat him half to death, which from his perspective is breaking 107 bones, and then goes through the logistics of that, again showing the twisted nature of the torture and how it's just completely fucking broken him. And we also see this duality of emotions and philosophy and ethics, where Kaneki can't really dive into the ghoul side of him, otherwise he completely loses it and it becomes a monster. And we see at the very end he eats his friend Hide, who becomes an investigator because he's obsessing with ghouls. He works at the facility part-time. He's one of the like honchos, sees some potential when he works certain things out, and like, alright, you're now an investigator, do the exams and everything. And Kaneki is like trying to warn him, like, please run away, I don't want to hurt you, sort of thing, but it's like half getting the words out, or whether they're just all internalized, because we do not know how well he's communicating to Hide. And we also don't know whether Hide is actually working out that Kaneki's a ghoul or not. I mean, he's told point blank, or at least inferred or whatever, but he's doing his best to help his mate, but Kaneki fucking eats him, which is just sad, just how much he loses it. And then immediately afterwards he has that battle with Ariyama, when it's revealed that what's happened with Rise, how he came about, and all around him there's these other failed experiments, which are technically his brothers and sisters, as worded by the Dr. Kano, who is with a Rogi tree, these bad ghouls, essentially, for some motive which we don't know about, which again I'll talk about in just a moment. And Kaneki eats all those ghouls. He then evolves. He goes from like rank S to rank SS. He's now referred to as the centipede because his Kagane morphs into like this weird centipede-like thing, which is again a reflection of the torture that he's gone through, and just how much of a badass that he is, but also how fucking broken he is. And it's just really sad just seeing Kaneki fall apart, not knowing what he wants to do, because he's trying to find out what happened to Rise, retracing her steps, or like who she is, what she is, and how the fact that no one really knows what's going on finds her. And then he now has the purpose to protect everybody, because he failed to protect people because he wasn't strong enough, because he was obsessing over this thing, etc. and so forth. And as I said, he doesn't really know what to do with his life. He's just sort of stuck in the middle, just lost. On top of the fact that you've just got these ghouls being hunted out of existence, these more nicer ghouls, because of the association with this really bad ghoul, who's, you could argue, has turned over a new leaf, you know, with all the people and ghouls he's killed. Like, is that a fair justify? Like, does he deserve to be killed like this? Do any of the fucking ghouls deserve to be hunted down just because of who and what they are? Things that they can't really control, especially when most of them, again, are trying to atone for their sins to do nice things. And some of them are there who are... Again, I'm stopping myself because you have Kishimi, who is presented as an antagonist earlier on, but it's also seen as fairly weak. He's an arsehole at the beginning. They're all varying degrees of arseholes, but a fair amount of it is just eating people to survive. And I guess in this sort of like sad, rambly state, this is sort of leading me towards my final thoughts of the manga, because Tokyo Ghoul really fucking moved me. And with shit that's happening in the world at the moment, from Palestine to various parts of the US to Ukraine, there are people who are being hunted, tortured, kidnapped, murdered for just being themselves, because they're just seen as the enemy because some other grander force has decided that they are a threat to be exterminated. That fascism is truly ruling this planet at the moment, and doesn't really matter all the human nuances that's happening with the investigator side of things. And I completely forgot to fucking mention, because there's a rather significant bit, the old crazy investigator's daughter fucking joins up and is working with him on. There's a bit of a romance there, which is sweet, and conflicted emotions, etc, etc. But they're all fucking arseholes, but then again so are the fucking ghouls, who, many of whom are just hunting the investigators, who most of which are there because a ghoul took their life. Well, a loved one's life, not their life, obviously. Like, most of them there because a ghoul killed their mum, their dad, their sibling. They witnessed something horrible, and they want to avenge their loved ones. And ghouls are hunting the investigators because they killed their own loved ones. There's no real winners, no real losers, although I am leaning more on the side of ghouls because they're just being hunted for being what they are. There wasn't really any sign of them trying to integrate them into better society one way or another, but as a disabled, autistic, bisexual man with a variety of mental health issues who throughout all of his life has been treated as an enemy in one way or another, I feel on the side of minorities here with the ghouls. Even though there's some truly fucking despicable people, there's just so many ghouls that are just trying to survive, that are just trying to do what they can just to live in peace. And at the end of it, the big fucking battle is with the most peaceful fucking ghouls. Because they're hunting the wrong person, and then the right one turns up, and then they fucking run off. So they fail. So all of that bloodshed was ultimately for nothing on both sides of things. It's difficult to avoid the violence and the bloodshed at the moment. Like, you log onto fucking social media, you're seeing fucking civilians getting blown up in the head, children malnourished. It's just a lot. And I don't know whether Tokyo Ghoul was intentionally meant to be a reflection of any of this, a warning, a commentary. But as cool as all the action is, as cool as all the artwork is, Tokyo Ghoul was a lot more emotionally stirring than I wanted it to be. And it's not like I didn't see those real-world connections at the time when I watched the anime. But the way that the anime tries and humanizes everyone on all sides of the fence, except for maybe like a few of the people of Erogi, they're clearly fucking bastards. At least that's how it's been presented, because you could argue that they're maybe working towards a goal of making ghouls more accepted. Albeit, that could be from the lens of being like ghouls being like the master race sort of thing, which is not good, because that's just fascism on the other side of things. Yeah, very emotional journey, a very emotional ride. Definitely worth the wait, because I've gotten older, a bit more wise to the world around me, even though I've been fairly tapped into things. I definitely feel over the last few years I've been more aware and more capable of seeing the evil and things just developing, maturing. I feel seen with Tokyo Ghoul in a really fucking morbid sense. And that's really fucking powerful stuff. And I can only hope that when I start reading Tokyo Ghoul I will experience similar emotions. And I know bits about it. Obviously, I know that it starts Kaneki, who goes under a different name now, an assistant investigator working under the woman investigator I mentioned a moment ago. She gets a promotion, now has a sidekick. But Lore, you said that Kaneki died. He was killed by that Aramara person. I do. But it's very clear from the art that is him, despite it being a different name and the fact that he's clearly got white hair. What I am hypothesizing at the moment, because it's alluded a little bit at the end, but it's not really followed. There's a lot of things that don't follow. We don't know what happens to half the fucking cast. Just some of the big, powerful ones. Because what's alluded to is actually that the investigator or the government or whatever are actually in on making these ghouls. And the only person that does know this is a man. He's not able to properly talk about it because the fucking fight that happens and he dies. And there's a scene with Kana and Erogi Tree. And I reckon they're all working together to create like these one-eyed ghoul investigators, like using ghouls to hunt down ghouls. Because it's talked in the fiction, as I mentioned before, the one-eyed ghouls are much stronger than regular ghouls. So they're able to artificially engineer ghouls that will remove the ghoul problem. And it's revealed, obviously, from the things that happened, that Kaneki is amongst the best, despite being the fact that he was like the first or amongst the first. So now they've got him nailed down. They probably will just make more of him or different versions of him. I would not be surprised if any of the investigators that lost limbs would end up returning as one-eyed ghouls. That one young investigator that wants to do the very best that he can, who was worried about being killed, I would not be surprised if he becomes a ghoul. Juzo, who seems far too important of a character for them to wipe off or take out commission because he doesn't have a leg. I would not be surprised if they do something with him. Like either they give him like a prosthetic or make him a ghoul in some descriptor. And I'm saying him because he refers himself as him at one point. I really should be using them because it's not really described. He's identified as no gender or none. But I don't know, the whole thing with Juzo's gender is a bit of a funny one. That I'd also want to see what happens to them emotionally, because especially towards the end you see they do have a father figure in like one of the head honcho investigators who was like the one who trained Amon originally at the university or some university, who kind of dismisses Amon a little bit, you know, like to let them to grow and foster on their own. Like there isn't much of a connection there, but all the connection that this investigator has is on Juzo trying to raise them as a kid, doing the best to look after them, circumstances providing, and they're out of commission now because they're in a coma. It's said that they're probably not going to wake up, which means they're going to wake up at a dramatically appropriate moment. But I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with Juzo, because I think one of the covers on one of the books is Juzo, so I don't know. I'm just speculating. So when I do my review of Tokyo Ghoul Re, it'll be very interesting to see what is right, what's wrong, and any other thing that may surprise me on the way. Because I said I don't really know what's going on, and if I'm right about that being Kaneki under a false name, it means that we've got a very fucking powerful half ghoul investigator who has the potential of turning fucking mad, and that won't look good for the investigators. And Erogi Tree, Kano, and the investigators, the higher-ups at least, all working together to making half-ghoul hunters, might explain why Aramana knows Kaneki's name, because they're quite high up. They may be in on it. So, who knows? So yeah, I think that kind of wraps up the video about my thoughts and opinions on Tokyo Ghoul, and a bit of speculation about my what I feel Tokyo Ghoul Re may deliver. I have purchased the box set, which was cheaper than buying them individually by a good 40 quid, which I think is a bit weird personally. It was quite a bit of money, about 80 something quid, but you know, rather that than 110 or 20. So I'll look forward to be reading that, giving my thoughts and opinions on this. And there have been some people, as I've been posting about this online, that have shown some enthusiasm and excitement. So hopefully that will reflect with the views in this video. And I'd be very curious to hear what you think about Tokyo Ghoul. What was good, what's bad, what the video game's like, because I know there's a couple of them out there. What's the third season of the Tokyo Ghoul anime like? I know there's a live action film. I'm not too sure how good that is or is not. Yeah, let's just start a good old conversation about Tokyo Ghoul down in the comments below. Yeah, as you've probably picked up, I'm a bit of an emotional wreck throughout the entirety of this project. So I will just bugger off and just survive the best I can in this very troublesome world. And I'll see you on the next upload, wherever and wherever that may well be for you. Until next time, farewell.